Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow ORF, Abhijit Majumdar, Consulting Editor, Firstpost. Gentlemen, joining us on the right stand. Namaste and Jai Hind. May I ask you, has the government actually taken the right stand? Was it already always taking the right stand? Or is that the opposition has been caught in a bind because they tried to jump onto a narrative that was being pushed by a platform because it suited them politically to take on the government? Abhijit.
Anand, could you repeat the question?
I'm asking you, is the government right in blaming the opposition and especially the Congress party of parroting a CCP narrative that was parroted by these news platforms? Or did the opposition just pick up news articles which was favorable to them politically because they were training their guns at the government?
We have to understand, Anand, that the opposition does not exist outside the political spectrum of the nation, right? The opposition is not a Pakistan or a China or Turkey or something, some other entity. They exist. They are a political formation within the nation.
Right.
So when you are picking up stuff and parroting stuff that the enemies of the nation are saying, wouldn't you vet that news? Wouldn't you vet that information before saying it? And this has been going on for a very long time. The whole thing about Newsclick is now in limelight because of New York Times's report. Well, I mean, one shouldn't give New York Times too much credence because of their completely biased coverage. But well, the so-called left liberal establishment has been sort of waving New York Times and Washington Post at our faces. But it is a kind of completely also discredits what they have been saying, and this has been happening for long. And if you look at what the main protagonist in the opposition till now, abhi tak, so Rahul Gandhi hai. Now, if Rahul Gandhi constantly speaks the language of China, Congress has not made public what is in the MOU that was signed between the Chinese Communist Party and the Congress Party in 2008, I think. And then Rahul Gandhi every now and then just unabashedly says that Indian soldiers have been beaten to pulp by the Chinese on the border. The Chinese have got into India and are occupying Indian land. The Chinese are so great, so good. India is terrible, and he says that even on foreign soil. So what are we to infer? Doesn't one need to sort of probe into what is going on? Because China is not just another nation. They invest billions of dollars just to build propaganda and narrative. They have been on the other side. They have been on the receiving end of tremendous China bashing by the West. And they have learned, this has happened for 30 years. The West has been bashing China till China made its way into Western media, and now media all over the world, as you can see. Even in India, they talk China's language, and so one has to look into what Congress and this so-called Chinese-funded media and everything. One has to look at it as a whole.
No, and not just that. It's also a strong reflection, Sushant Sareenji, if I can come across to you, as Abhijit has put out, that you have to also see the polity or the politics of India or the opposition is part of the Indian ecosystem. So is the entire journalistic fraternity. So are we sold to the highest bidder so easily? Are we ready to parrot a narrative which could actually hurt our nation's interest in the garb of taking a politically variant position? Do we not realize, are we not intelligent enough to know, as we try to drive the intelligentsia and become the intelligentsia, those who are the thinking minds of the country, who form opinions, that these people are up to no good? We'll take their money and dance for them?
Anand, there are multiple thoughts going on in my mind right now, and I think Abhijit Da has also provoked me some. But let me just say something. One, at best, the guys you're talking about are useful idiots. Again, it's a very leftist communist term. Useful idiots who probably are smart in some things but are dumb in how they are being useful idiots for an enemy country. That's at best. And at worst, they are actually consciously, deliberately working as agents of a hostile foreign power. That is one. Second, look, China is not the only country which indulges in this activity. And I'm sure Newsclick is not the only organization which is involved in this. And there are other countries which pretend to be very friendly to India, but also carry out very hostile propaganda of the sorts Abhijit Da is talking about has happened with China over the last 30 years. Okay, I can give you some British media organizations, including the New York Times for that matter, even including the Washington Post. The kind of slant they have, the kind of news they publish on India. Okay, it's not as though the New York Times is like this holy saint which is exposing this devilish Chinese Communist Party. But what is really scaring the hell out of me is that despite the fact that the Indian agencies, the ED in particular, had started investigating a dubious organization like Newsclick and was examining their funding patterns, they were doing it purely from a money laundering point of view, right? And nobody in India, either it did not enter the imagination of the people in the security agencies, or they simply glossed over that fact. But nobody decided to delve into why such an organization is being used for money laundering, to try and link up the kind of news these guys were peddling and the narratives these guys were trying to create with the kind of agenda they were pushing. And I think that is something, and frankly, I'm again not a fan of New York Times. I think it churns out so much of nonsense against India that it's not funny anymore. And yet I have to thank them for the kind of very robust and very rigorous investigation which they have done to get to the bottom of how the funding is taking place, how the networks are established. This is something that our security agencies should have been doing. For example, Anand, there are the so-called mainstream national newspapers. Many of them don't have much of a circulation anyways.
Correct.
Right? But these are guys who are carrying out 2 full pages of Chinese news, advertorial. And obviously they're getting paid for it. So I've just tweeted something. I want to know, somebody should have been doing this exercise in the government. This is not my job, right? My job is something else. But somebody in government should have been monitoring these guys and seeing whether the news which they publish on China or from where the money is coming from, whether that news is fair, objective, and sometimes not complimentary to countries like China, or whether they kind of brush it aside. Because we know that there are certain editors, so-called respected guys, very respected fellows. Some of them are no longer, editing those newspapers, but they still own those newspapers, who have been quite unabashed in their liking for China and in their liking for this kind of an agenda, and have plugged for it openly, publicly. And yet, there is so much of fear in this government that it is not willing to call a spade and not willing to get to the bottom of it. But I can understand consensus objection. I can understand somebody questioning the government, and I have nothing against it. Okay. But and I also understand that opposition, the way politics happens in India, you will have opposition parties take digs at the government, even if it's at the cost of national pride, national security.